Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Ricciardi. Jeff Mousseau and I are directors of the Ancram Opera House, and we're so glad you could be here today. Just a couple things before we get started. Turn off your cell phones, please. So go ahead and do that now. In case of an emergency, there, where you came in are the exits. And this show is generously underwritten by Copake Wineworks, so please patronize them. They are lovely. So today marks our 16th Real People, Real Stories event. It also marks our I think 82nd volunteer storyteller. So we've engaged 82 storytellers over the course of the past 8 years, and that doesn't include the 900 4th, 5th, and 6th graders from Taconic Hills Elementary School. There's some of you were here last week. We had 15 4th, 5th, and 6th graders telling stories about dirt bike crashes and caterpillars and paper cups and cats jumping out of windows. And this isn't our last event for the season. We have one more. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, we have our community open house. It's free. There'll be food and maybe a pop-up performance or two. So if you're around, please come and visit us from 2 to 5 p.m. right here at the Opera House. So there's that. I think that is all I need to say. So we have 4 storytellers for you today. The first storyteller from Sharon, Connecticut, with with a story about a dog named Nikki, about her mother, about her friend Joni, and not necessarily in that order. Please welcome to the stage from Sharon, Connecticut, Emily Soell.
Okay, so first let me tell you that this story happened a long time ago, and I have been preparing to tell you this story for about 6 months, so long before the things that happened and are present in the world today. And I tell you this because I think you will enjoy the story, I hope you do enjoy the story, more if you look at it through that lens, or listen to it through that lens. Anyway, when I was in 3rd grade, my mother, my father, my brother, our boxer dog named Nicky, and our German cook named Hedwig Weinberg moved from a Park Avenue apartment in New York City to a house in Jericho, Long Island. Now at that point, Jericho, Long Island was estates separated by lower middle class houses. My family moved to one of the estates. There were 3 entrances to this estate. The first entrance on one end was to a 4-car garage, the vegetable garden, chicken coop, gardener's cottage. On the other end, there was an entrance to a stable where Eddie Munson boarded ours and other people's horses. And in the middle was the main entrance to the house. And right flanking the entrance in the middle was one of those huge weathered shingle windmills that you find on Long Island. Now the windmill didn't do anything, it was just for storage, but it impelled my mother to name our house, and she named it Cottage Mill. It was a name that she emblazoned on cocktail napkins and fingertip towels, and on the side of the wooden side of our station wagon. This house was not a cottage. It was a sprawling Tudor house that you had with a circular driveway and lawns and gardens, and down a really beautiful lawn was a swimming pool. Now in those days, swimming pools were made of concrete, and you emptied them in the winter so that the water didn't freeze and crack the pool, and you put straw in the bottom, and then in the spring you took the straw out and you filled the pool with a garden hose. Now, can you imagine how long it takes to fill a pool with a garden hose? Anyway, my brother and I, every morning after breakfast, we would run down to see the progress of filling the pool. And one day, when we got there, the pool was about 3/4 full, and all around the pool were kids with their bikes. There was kids we would get to know, Jimmy McGurk, Paul Van Nostran, Harrison Alley, Bobby Wagner. There were the Metzger boys, they were twins, who my mother said were so dirty, she threatened to call Mrs. Metzger and say, unless you clean up those boys, they are not allowed to swim in the pool. And there was only one girl in the group, and her name was Joni Zilkowski. And she gave me to understand that we might be friends. Joni Zilkowski lived in one of the lower middle-class houses, and she couldn't have been more different than I was. She had a huge Polish Catholic family, and she was the youngest. Her father was the superintendent of the Jericho School, which meant the janitor in those days. Her mother stayed home and cooked. She had sisters named Bertha and Rose Marie, and I thought they were the most beautiful women I had ever seen in my life. I'm sure they were just teenage girls. And Mr. Zilkowski also had a cider mill where he sold cider and donuts coming right out of the fat. Oh, and I'm telling you, I loved Joni Zilkowski. I worshiped Joni Zilkowski. I wanted to look like her and write like her and dress like her and talk like her. I mean, as I said, she went to Catholic school, and Joni Zilkowski got confirmed. And when Joni Zilkowski got confirmed, she had on what looked to me like a bride's dress. It was all white lace, and she had, a veil, and she had white patent leather shoes, and she carried a little bouquet. Oh, I was so jealous of Joni Zilkowski in that bride's dress. And I went home to my mother, and I said, why can't I get confirmed? And my mother said, Jewish girls do not get confirmed. Which actually shows you how little my mother understood about our religion, because years later, as a Reformed Jew, I got confirmed at Temple Emmanuel. No bride's dress, but I think my mother wished, or thought actually, that God had made a mistake and she was supposed to be Episcopalian. She would have settled for Presbyterian, even Unitarian. I mean, we had Christmas trees and Easter bunnies growing up. My mother would not have known how to light a menorah or throw a seder if her life depended on it. But I think basically to describe to you the primary difference between the way I lived and the way Joni Zilkowski lived was to tell you about dinner at the various houses. At my house, dinner was served by Martin, our black butler chauffeur. He would bring out to our table like little cups of jellied madeleine. We would have, a lamb chop with a little frill on the end of it. We had salad after the meal, like they do in Europe. We would have dessert. We would have creme brulee. But the thing that was the most different was the butter. Now, at my house, butter had been rolled between two striated panels, so it came out into a little ball with crisscrosses indented on it, and it was hard as a rock. You could not spread that butter on anything for the life of you. And it was sweet butter, so it didn't have any taste or any smell, and to me it was just like sort of a ball of fat. The other thing about our household was there were no smells, because my father didn't like garlic and my mother didn't like what she called aromas. Joni Zilkowski's house, the smells of cooking, of cabbage and stews and and stuff like that, and huge bowls of steaming food were slammed down on the table, and You reached over with a spoon, and you slapped the mashed potatoes down on your plate. And for dessert, we had, because of the cider mill, apple pie with heavy cream just poured over it. Hot apple pie, you just pour on the heavy cream. But now, the butter. The butter at Joni Zolkowski's house came in a rectangular cellophane packet, and it was white as snow. And in the center of it was this little orange tablet. And what you were supposed to do was squeeze this orange tablet until the colors, it was food coloring, diffused into the white butter, and it became sunshiny and yellow. And I mean, and you would cut off the end and squeeze that butter onto the mashed potatoes, and it melted in a puddle. Oh. I mean, and so that was the difference. Now, remember the cider mill. So often, every once in a while, Mr. Zolkowski would allow me and Joni to man the cider mill. And so we would be there, and people would come to get their cider and their donuts, and they would see these cute little third grade and fourth grade girls, and they would leave us sometimes 25 cents. And we became to know that if the car was really big and shiny, often we got 50 cents. Now, one day, there was very little traffic at the cider mill, and we were manning the cider mill. And Joni Zolkowski turned to me, and she said, "I hate the Jews, don't you?" Now, in my third grade brain, I thought, it seems to be a choice between Joni Zolkowski and the Jews. And frankly, Jews don't really mean a lot to me. So to the question, "I hate the Jews, don't you?" I said, "I do." And Joni then said, "The Jews killed Christ." And I said, "I know." And then I went home to my mother and I said, "Did the Jews kill Christ?" My mother looked at me with an expression on her face that was somewhere between horror and fury. And she said to me, "Who told you the Jews killed Christ?" And I said, "Well, Joni Zolkowski said the Jews killed Christ." And my mother said, "This will be fixed." 2 days or so later, I understood that my mother had invited Mrs. Zolkowski for tea. I cannot tell you how this terrified me. No good would come of this. I thought, I'll never be able to play with Joni Zolkowski again. So I decided I really needed to be present at that tea, which of course was not allowed. But I thought, in what my mother called, I knew where she was going to serve tea. She was going to serve tea in a room she called the drawing room. And in the drawing room were these large drapes that puddled on the floor. And so when Mrs. Zolkowski arrives and my mother gets up to greet her, I run into the drawing room and I get myself behind that drape, that puddle of drapes. Now I'm aware that my mother is coming into the room with Mrs. Zolkowski, and she's saying to Mrs. Zolkowski, "Well, Mrs. Zolkowski, Emily and Joan are really good friends, and I think that's very nice, don't you?" And Mrs. Zolkowski said nothing because she was too busy looking around the room. I mean, that's what she was there for, to see the house. And so now she and Mrs. Zolkowski sit down, and my mother says to Mrs. Zolkowski, "Now, Mrs. Zolkowski, but it was so troublesome to me that Joan told Emily that the Jews had killed Christ." Meanwhile, Martin comes in with this tray, with the tea tray, this big sterling silver tea tray, and on it are all the accoutrements of tea. And he stands, and my mother, meaner than a stick, looks at Mrs. Zolkowski and says, "Will you pour?" Mrs. Zolkowski hasn't the slightest idea what she's talking about. And my mother, after a slight pause, says, "Oh, that's all right. Martin will pour." So now, the only person in that room that Mrs. Olkowski feels superior to, the black guy with the tray, is doing something she was asked to do and couldn't do. Now, meanwhile, my mother is talking to Mrs. Olkowski about the Jews didn't kill Christ. Into the room walks Nicky, the dog. Nicky is my dog. My brother is scared of the dog, and so he has always been my dog. He comes into the room and smells I am in the room. So he goes over to the, and then he knows exactly where I am. So he walks over and he starts scratching at the drape. And I'm going, no, Nicky. And pulling the drapes around me, and my mother has her back to the drapes, and but she is suddenly aware that there's something wrong with this dog, and so she, and she's saying, "Go, Nicky, go." But of course, Nicky doesn't pay any attention, and so my mother pushes a little button that's underneath the carpet that summons the servants, and Martin comes back in, and my mother says, "Martin, take this dog out of this room." And so Martin goes over, gets the dog, he has to pull the drapes open, and there am I. And my mother, without a beat, says, "Martin, take this dog and this child out of the room." Out we go. Well, of course, as you can imagine, there was hell to pay that afternoon. My mother saying, I was eavesdropping, I wasn't supposed to be there, and I burst into tears, and I said, "But you see, I thought I'd never be able to play with Joni Zolkowski again." My mother said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous, you can play with Joni Zolkowski again. But here's what you have to learn, or you have to know. Joni Zolkowski is in an entirely different class than you are." And I thought, well, of course, what a dumb thing for her to say. First of all, Joni Zolkowski goes to parochial school, and I go to Friends Academy in Locust Valley. She's a grade ahead of me. Of course we're not in the same class. So the upshot of that is I was allowed to play with Joni Zolkowski, and about 4 years later, we moved back to New York, and I went to the Dalton School, where I made a lot of interesting friends, many of whom I brought up for the weekend to the country, my country house. And I became aware of what my mother meant when she said, "You and Joni Zolkowski are not in the same class." Now, if this were a movie, leaves would be flying off the calendar. There'd be a calendar there, and the leaves would, fly off that to show that we're going forward in time. And so now I'm grown up. I am married. I live in Chappaqua, Westchester, and I have a 3-year-old. And up the street from me lives spinster sisters, named Lucy and Jenny. Now, I'm not really good friends with Lucy and Jenny. I introduced myself to them when we bought the house. And, if I'm driving by and they're out in their yard, we'll wave back. But, they didn't come for coffee or anything like that. So you can imagine my surprise when the doorbell rings and standing there are Lucy and Jenny. And they say, "We came to congratulate you. You must be thrilled. You must be thrilled. We are thrilled for you." And I thought, what are they talking about? And they said, the Pope has decreed, and it's all over the news. And I said, well, I've got a 3-year-old, I don't watch the news. And they said, "Oh, you don't know? Then we're the first to tell you. The Pope has decreed that the Jews did not kill Christ." And I don't say anything, and they said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "I don't know." And well, of course you don't know. Take it in. Just take it in. You and your people will be able to hold their heads high again. And then Jenny, who had been doing most of the talking, Lucy interrupted, and she said, "Oh, but listen, dear, we always knew the Jews did not crucify Christ." And Lucy said, "No, of course they didn't. They stoned him to death." You know, about 5 weeks ago, something like that. Anyway, just before the Hamas-Israel thing happened, I received this book in the mail from Amazon. The Jewish American Paradox, subtitled Embracing Choice in a Changing World. Now, I did not buy this book. This is not the kind of book that I buy. But there was no indication of who had sent me this book. There was no card. There was no name on the, like on the address thing of who it had come from. I called every single friend I had the slightest possibility of sending me this book. And none of them had. So I call Amazon, and I have the merchandise number, I have the shipping number, I have, like everything that you can imagine. And they cannot find who sent me this book. And they said, "Well, we won't charge you for it." And I said, "Well, of course you don't charge. I didn't send the book." And they said, "Well, we have no idea who sent you this book." You know, my whole life, I have been sidestepping my religion. Not denying it. I mean, I tell anybody who asks me, or if it comes up that I'm Jewish, but just kind of ignoring it, just thinking that basically it's the very least part of who I am. And yet, here's the irony. Decade after decade, year after year, my Jewishness comes back to get me. Thank you.
Emily Soell. Thank you, Emily. All right. Up next, with a story about how other people's perspectives can change the course of someone's life. From just north of Hudson, New York, please welcome to the stage Marisa Russello. Sorry, probably this needed.
That's fine. It's 2009. I'm 23, and I've just moved to Baltimore. I'm living with 2 roommates. The first one is Najmeen, and we're pretty good friends. The second one, I don't even really remember her name. She's always working. I'm about to start my first real job. I'll be teaching middle school Spanish. When I get to school on the first day, I feel like I want to save the world. The students, on the other hand, they just want me to quit. All that I can get them to say is, ¿Dónde está el baño? And I have flashes from that first week still today of students pelting me with broken crayons, going through my desk and tossing confidential papers out the window, breaking out into fistfights in my room. And that was just in the first week of school. I also wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't eating, drinking, I wasn't sleeping. I was planning lessons 24/7. So by Friday, I passed out in my apartment. Najmeen, the roommate, she calls an ambulance. At the hospital, they tell me, rest, get plenty to eat and drink. They give me an IV. Of course, I don't listen to their instructions. I keep doing exactly what I was doing. Najmeen is really worried about me, so she calls my mom, who's on Long Island. My mom flies down to Baltimore, and my mom tells me to do the same things that the hospital did. Of course, I don't listen to her either. And at one point that day when my mom's over, she's trying to force feed me, and I'm still planning those lessons. I'm walking through my living room, and suddenly I feel something I've never felt before in my life. It's like a painful buzz in the back of my head, sort of like an electric shock. And I don't realize it, but I'm having a seizure. And I just crumple to the floor. I'm laying face up on the floor, and I have lost my vision, but I'm still conscious. And since I can't see, I start screaming, "I'm blind, why can't I see anything?" And my mom rushes over. She tries to comfort me, puts her arm on my forearm, and the minute she touches my skin, it feels like it's searing me, and it's burning. It really hurts. So I start yelling at her, "Get away from me!" And I don't even recognize her as my mother. I start calling her Mrs. X. And I think that she's the devil, that she's there to kill me. So I try to push her off me. And my roommate, Najmeen, comes out, wants to see what all the commotion is. She tries to comfort me because I won't let my mom do it. Mom goes to the side, calls 911. An ambulance arrives for the second time in 24 hours. And so we go downstairs. I refuse to let my mom in the ambulance because I still think she's this Mrs. X person. And I tell my mom that she's got to walk to the hospital. Luckily, it's only about a 10-minute walk away, and she's in pretty good shape. I do remember at that time, I regained my sight because I thought one of those EMTs was just so dreamy. And I had an idea. I asked him, "Are you studying pre-med in college?" And he was like, yeah. And so I start trying to flirt with him using science pickup lines. And I say, "Oh, well, I was a really good chemistry student when I was in college, and I could be your tutor." So he's like, "Well, I'm pretty good at chemistry already." And I go, "Well, maybe that's why there's so much chemistry between us." And I mean, is it getting hotter in here, or is that just our bond forming? And I'm pretty sure in that moment, all he was thinking was, "Can this ride please be over soon?" And so eventually we do get to the hospital. Mom gets there a few minutes later. Sorry, Mom. And when she gets there, she's surprised to see that I am acting entirely different. I'm no longer calling her Mrs. X. In fact, I'm a pleasant person now. I'm cheerful, bubbly, and overly polite to everybody. I'm saying to everyone that passes by, every doctor, nurse, staff member, "Oh, God bless you." And my mom's really surprised to hear this from her daughter, who's supposed to be an atheist. So the doctor in the ER, psych ER, says to my mom that I'm having an episode of manic psychosis, and he thinks that I have bipolar disorder. This is a new diagnosis for me. My mom doesn't think this is right, even though it runs in our family. And the doctor tries to convince her, and he also tells her that for the rest of my life, I'll need to be regulating my sleep and my nutrition. I'll need to take medications every day, and I probably won't be able to hold the job down. And he's also not even talking to me. He's talking only to my mother, as if I don't even exist. I'm thinking, this guy's crazy. This guy's the one who's crazy, because I've never felt better in my life. But my mom decides that she wants to get a second opinion. And I'm happy with that. She takes us both back to Long Island, and we're gonna get that second opinion. So we get to the airport a few hours later. And we're going through the security line. I try to greet every person in that line, just like I'm running for office. Hi, my name's Marisa. We're traveling to New York today. Where are you going? And my mom's eyes are to the floor. She's kind of embarrassed and kind of dragging me along. We go past the TSA agents, and I just wave to them and say, "Thank you for your service." Eventually we get to the gate. I'm suddenly hit with a migraine, which I get a lot, and I start yelling in the middle of this airport. My head, it hurts so much. It just feels like a bomb exploding. And my mom tries to cover my mouth, but I won't let her. And she goes, "You know, if they haven't called security yet, they're going to now." Luckily, they don't. And she slips me one of the heavily sedating antipsychotics from the hospital. And we are able to arrive safely in New York. The next day, both my parents and I, we go to my old psychiatrist, who I had seen in college for depression. This doctor ends up giving me the exact same diagnosis. However, she does this in a more compassionate way, and she explains all the details in a way that I can understand. So I start to believe this person, and she talks about ups and downs. I think about when I was a kid, how I used to write in my journal about feeling like I was on a roller coaster ride. And it feels like a puzzle piece just clicks in my brain that, yeah, these symptoms make sense to me. Maybe this is what's happening. So the doctor prescribes some new prescriptions, and we head on home. Over the next 2 weeks, I very slowly come down from this manic psychosis. And I don't sleep most nights. I still have endless energy the next day, every day. I have racing thoughts. I will talk nonstop to anyone that I see. Words just come pouring out of my mouth. I also think that I'm a genius, smartest person in the world, and I watch marathons of Jeopardy all day, every day. For some reason, they never called me to be on the show. And by the end of those 2 weeks, I've come down a decent amount from the mania, and my psychiatrist and parents and I think I'm about ready to head back to Baltimore to teach. Little do we know, I'm still experiencing a lesser form of mania called hypomania. So when I get back to school, I do some interesting things to my classroom. I decide that I'd like to paint the walls and cabinets purple and the desks purple to match, because that's my favorite color. And it has those old musty green chalkboards, which I don't want to get chalk all over my hands. And so I decide to glue whiteboards over all the chalkboards. I volunteer to be the cheerleading coach for the school, even though I know absolutely nothing about cheerleading. And I'm still doing most of what I was doing before. Only the hypomania is masking the stress. And I'm still not taking care of myself, and I'm drinking or chugging bottles of Ensure to get through every day, instead of eating my lunch. One night, I get home from work a little bit earlier than usual. It's pretty quiet in my apartment. So I start walking towards the bedrooms at the back, and one of the bedroom doors is shut, and I hear some voices behind the door. And I walk closer and kind of listen. I hear my name. So I go up to the door, and I'm overhearing this conversation. It's one that I won't forget. My first roommate, Najmeen, she says, "My aunt is a psychiatrist, and she thinks she might have schizophrenia." My second roommate gasps, sorry, I can't say that word, and then says, "Aren't those people violent?" And my stomach drops. Najmeen then says, "That's why I'm hiding a steak knife under my pillow." So I turn away from the door, walk down the hall, and cry into my comforter for the next several hours. About a month goes by, and my two roommates tell me, "We need you to move out. You're too messy." Actually, they have my mother relay this message to me because they're afraid of how I would react. I'm too devastated by this to stay in Baltimore and search for another apartment. I give my 2 weeks notice at my job, and I move back in with my parents on Long Island. So the truth is, it's not the way bipolar wreaks havoc on my brain that's the worst part. It's other people's reactions to it. And that is still true to this day. So if you're given the chance, I really hope that you will choose kindness. Thank you.
Marisa Russello, thank you, Marisa. Thank you. All right. I don't know why I'm treating this like a raffle. I know exactly who's next. Okay. With a story about how you never know what's behind an unopened door, from Lanesboro, Massachusetts, please welcome to the stage Anne Undeland.
I love to wonder as I wander, and vice versa. One of my favorite things to do in this New England landscape is drive around in my car, especially at the crepuscular moment of day when the sun's going down and people are starting to turn their lights on. And I just love driving past and looking in people's houses and wonder, what's going on behind that window? What just happened? Did somebody just make dinner? Did someone do their homework? Did someone just make love? Did someone just kill somebody? What's going on? And I look in the window, and then I drive past their house, and then there's this stretch of beautiful green rolling landscape, and then there's another house, and then a stretch of rolling green landscape, and then another house. This landscape is the opposite of the landscape of my childhood. I grew up in the Middle East. My dad was a career Foreign Service officer, and he was an Arabist, which means he specialized in the Middle East. He spoke Arabic and was an expert in that region. So I was born in Egypt, and I spent most of my childhood years in the Levant, basically in Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. And the country that I remember the most, because I think I spent sort of the most formative years in this place, was Jordan. I was there from the age of about 6 to 9. We lived there from 1971 till about 1974, so I'm nearly 60. One thing that the State Department does is they keep you moving around. So it's unusual to live in one place for more than 2 years. If you live in a place for 3, that's a lot. 4 is almost unheard of. And the reason they do this is essentially to keep you from going native, right? They want their diplomats to represent the United States, not necessarily the country they're living in. So we're constantly uprooting and moving. I think the military does the same thing, right? People moving around a lot, which might be great for diplomacy, but was a little hard on me as a kid, because we were constantly uprooting, and I'd have to move to a new place and make a bunch of new friends, and then uproot and move to a new place and make more friends, or not make friends. So what I did a lot was I was an enormous reader. I read and I read and I read and I read. And the books that I read were, I loved Nancy Drew. I loved the Bobbsey twins. I loved Cherry Ames, Student Nurse. I loved the Hardy Boys and would have fantasies about being Joe Hardy's girlfriend. And I loved the Raggedy Ann books, which, if you haven't read them, they're a little trippy. But basically, the premise of the Raggedy Ann books is that there's Raggedy Ann and the other dolls, and they're all kind of living in the nursery. And then, when the mistress and the household all goes to sleep, the dolls and the stuffed animals wake up, and they have all sorts of adventures. And I just loved this idea. I would just have all these fantasies about the adventures that Raggedy Ann would have, because for me, I love to read, but I think what I liked even more than that was like making up stories of adventures that I would have with these various characters. So I would leave little cups, little Dixie cups of water out for the stuffed animals and dolls at night with a little line marked along the side to see if somebody drank the water. And the next day I'd come and I'd see the Dixie cup, and if it wasn't exactly at the line that I'd written on the thing, I'd be like, aha, they're alive. That was a big, huge part of my life as a kid. Another aspect of life in the Foreign Service in places like the Middle East is that you'll live generally in a pretty big fancy house, and you'd have a pretty big staff. And so when we lived in Jordan, we lived in this amazing house. that was at the end of a street, and on one side was this wadi that water would just rush through whenever it rained, like this crazy river just rushing through. And then on the other side of the house was this open lot that was undeveloped, and shepherds would come with their sheep in a scene that was millennia old, like they stepped out of the Bible and they'd graze their sheep in this lot next to our house. And then there was our house itself, which was this wonderful limestone house with a courtyard, this beautiful green garden, and the whole thing was walled. And part of that household also is that we had a pretty big staff. So we had maids, and we had a cook, and we had, get this term, a houseboy. It was very colonial. And we had guards, and we had a driver, and we had a gardener. And that gardener must have been a magician, because that garden was so beautiful. One day, I was in the garden, and I had reread the Hardy Boys or whatever one time too many. So I put it down, and I started wandering around the garden. And I came across the garage door. There was a bunch of rose bushes, the lawn, and then this garage door that was this metal door with a handle, no windows. And I remember thinking, I wonder what's behind that door. So I went up to the door, checking to make sure there wasn't anybody watching me, because something in me was making me think I probably shouldn't go in the garage, but I was curious. So I went to the door, and I remember pulling the handle down and then pushing the door open, and this triangle of brilliant Levantine sunshine just floods into the garage, which was a completely windowless room. And it takes a minute for my eyes to get used to the light. And I remember sort of looking to my left and seeing like a kerosene cook stove, which is what people would use to make tea and cook food on. I remember thinking, it's a little weird that there's a cook stove in the garage. And then above the cook stove was a shelf with little glasses, these little glasses that you'd have to drink tea, this very, very sweet tea. And there was food on the shelf and crockery. And I remember thinking, why is there like a kitchen in the garage? And I sort of looked down, and I'm thinking, shouldn't there be like garden implements or maybe a lawnmower or something having to do with cars? And then I look over to the right, and there's this mattress on the floor pushed up against the wall, and I'm thinking, that's like what people have in their houses. In a lot of Arab households, there will be mattresses that line the perimeter of a room that people will sit on, and there's pillows. And I'm thinking, that's so strange. And then there's another mattress right next to it. And so I'm thinking, that's like, this isn't like a garage at all. This is like the inside of somebody's house. And then my eyes are sort of going along the edges of the room, and then I get to the back of the room, and I see them. I see 4 eyes looking at me. And I stop, and they stop, and we look at each other, and I realize that these are 2 children in our garage. There's this little girl who's probably about, I don't know, she's about 6 years old, and she's holding a baby. And the two of them are looking at me, and I'm looking at them. And everything in my mind is going, what is going on? This isn't a garage. This is somebody's house. And there are children in my house. There are people living in my garage. And so I remember I just slammed the door shut, and I went running around the yard, like shaking my hands and running and thinking, God, I can't know this. I can't know this. Somebody is going to get in a lot of trouble. I cannot tell anybody that there is this family living in my garage. There's this whole other life in my garage that isn't like Raggedy Ann and her, her other stuffed animals. There's a family. There are children living in the dark in my garage. I can't tell anybody. And here's the thing. I didn't tell anybody until I was 53 years old. And I think to myself, what was that? And then I think, the membrane among us is so thin. You don't know what happened in a house behind a window. You don't know what's going on in a garage behind a metal door that's this thin. And I could have been those children, and those children could have been me. And the thing I think that really confounds me about this story is I only realized recently, actually in preparing this story with Paul, is what if I had made a different choice? What if instead of running away and saying, oh my God, there's a family living in my garage, no one can know about this? What if instead I had chosen to interact with those kids? I was a lonely girl, and there was a little girl right there. Why couldn't I have said hello? I don't know the answer to that. Well, I do, I think. But it's something that I wonder about every day. What makes it so hard to just be together with another person who's right there, but is a universe away? Thank you.
Ann Undeland, thank you, Ann. Thank you. All right, our final raffle. With a story about a love affair with a dog from Taconic, Connecticut, please welcome to the stage Macey Levin.
Over many years, my wife Gloria and I have had 4 dogs, 10 cats, and a turtle. For part of that time, for several years, we had 3 dogs and 7 cats all at the same time. Yeah, oh. Now we have a dachshund named Sasha and a turtle named Shelley. What else would you call a turtle? In 2003, Gloria and I were living on Long Island, but we had a house here in Taconic, Connecticut, which is part of Salisbury. I was a retired high school teacher. Gloria was still teaching high school. And one morning in October, on a Wednesday. The phone rings around 9 o'clock. I pick it up, and I hear, I've got a dog in the back seat of the car. Drive up here. We'll switch cars. You take the dog to the vet down the road. I've already called him. He's waiting for you. I said, I'm supposed to be having lunch with some friend. No, I can't do that. Gloria needs me. She needs my help. The dog needs my help. That's where I belong. What had happened on her way to work, she saw on the side of a very busy road something black. And she thought it's either a trash bag or a dog. She pulls over, and obviously it's a dog. Evidently he'd been hit by a car and left to die. His hindquarters are matted with blood. He's alive, but he's not moving. There's no collar. Some guy comes along, helps her get the dog in the car, and she goes to school. I drive up, we switch cars. I go to the vet down the road. They come out with a gurney, they take him in back. The attendant says, we are very busy, but we'll give him painkillers. Wednesday afternoon I call. They haven't gotten to him yet. But the attendant says he hasn't barked, he hasn't whimpered, he seems like a good dog. So Thursday morning I call, they haven't gotten to him yet. Thursday afternoon I call, they haven't gotten to him yet. Friday morning I call a regular vet, he calls them, they can't talk to him because everybody's in a meeting. They do not return his call. He tells us to get the dog and go to an emergency surgical clinic that he knows. That afternoon, Gloria gets on the phone, calls the vet, says, we are coming to get the dog. And the attendant says, we can't release the dog until we check all our sources to see if anybody has a claim for him. So Gloria says, we are coming to get the dog. If you don't give him to us, the next voice you hear will be our lawyer. We get the dog, and they give us a Good Samaritan discount. We take the dog to the emergency clinic. We go in, we meet a Dr. Carb, who takes the dog right in back, and we sit in his office and wait for him. He comes in with 2 x-rays 15, 20 minutes later, and he says, on the right side of the dog, he's got 2 broken bones in his right rear leg, but we can repair them with metal plates. On the left side, his hip is smashed, but we can clean it out and put a ball in. He's a black lab mix, and he's 7 months old. They can tell how old a dog is by their teeth. My next question is, when are you going to start working on him? When you leave. So we go out to the car, we're driving home, and I don't remember who says this, but one of us says, you know, we're spending a lot of money on this dog. I think we should keep him. And that's an agreement. So now we start thinking about a name. Gloria says, how about Lucky? Because he's lucky. And I said, every dog is named Lucky. I've only heard of one in the last how many years. I said, how about Luke? That's close to Lucky. He says, okay. I said, you know, if he's 7 months old, he was born in March. So let's make his birthday on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. That's a lucky day. And on that day, and that day only, his name will be Lucky Luke 11. Saturday morning, I call the vet. All the procedures are fine. They want to watch him for a few more days. Call us on Tuesday. I call on Tuesday. Come and get him. I go to the clinic. Gloria's at work, of course. I go to the clinic, and Dr. Carb and an attendant bring out Luke. And he says, don't let him walk upstairs or downstairs for the next 2 weeks. Gloria and I live in a second-floor apartment in a private home. He also says, take him out for a walk a couple times a day, and every day go a little bit further. So I do all that. I carry him upstairs and downstairs. I take him outside for his business. I tell people that Luke and I bonded over pee and poop. Now, Luke is a very lovable, loving dog. He's also a character with character. When we got him home that first week, we did not want him to sleep on the bed with us because he was already good size and we had a cat on the bed. So we put a couple of blankets on the floor by the foot of the bed, and he would sleep there, and that went well for 4, 5, 6 days. Then one night we get into bed and he's on the floor and he starts whimpering. I get up, I go and I quiet him down, get back into bed, he starts whimpering. Gloria gets up, tries to get him to be quiet. He's just whimpering and whimpering. I said, well, maybe his legs are still hurting him on the floor. So let's bring him up on the bed and he's whimpering, still whimpering. So we get into bed, we put the lights out, the whimpering stops forever. We had a cat named Zeke. Zeke was all white, but he was an imp. You could tell through his eyes. Now, when Gloria and I would watch television, we'd sit on the sofa, and Luke would snuggle between us. And Zeke would be on a cat bed on the floor. But one night, Luke gets off the sofa, goes into the other room for water. Zeke comes up onto the sofa and snuggles between us. Luke comes in, he's poised to come onto the sofa, he sees Zeke, he stares at Zeke, he looks at the cat bed, he looks at Zeke, he looks at the cat bed, he walks over to the cat bed, and this 35-pound dog lies down on the small cat bed, curls up, and goes to sleep. Now, Zeke was diabetic. We gave him a shot of insulin in the morning and a shot at night. And every now and then, a glaze would come over his eyes, and he'd go into diabetic shock. And he would walk around the periphery of the room, often the kitchen. We would brush against the appliances, the wall, the cabinets, and Luke would walk with him every step, watching him for however long it took. And finally, we would give Zeke something to eat, and he would lie down, he'd go to sleep, and he'd come back being normal. When Luke was 14 or 15, one Saturday morning, he was trying to get up, and he couldn't. He would push his right paws down on the floor, try to get up, and he'd collapse time and time and time again. So we thought that maybe his back legs were acting up. We called the vet. She says, bring him in. We zoomed down to the Militant Veterinary Practice. We obviously are in Taconic now. They bring him in on a stretcher. They put him on the floor because if they put him on the table and he tries to get up, he may fall off. So the vet examines him, and she says he has old dog syndrome. Old dog syndrome? What the hell is old dog syndrome? She says it's a form of vertigo. Do you mind if we try some acupuncture? So we said, no, go right ahead, because we've done that on some of our other animals. And she starts putting the needles in him. No whimpering, no barking. He accepts it all. And while we were waiting for the time to relapse, she says, maybe what you should do is bring him in a couple times a week for the next 2 or 3 weeks for acupuncture treatments. Okay, we'll do that. We want our dog to be well. Then she starts to take out the needles. The attendants come in with a stretcher to take him out to the car. The needles come out. Luke stands up on his own, shakes himself the way dogs do, and he walks to the door, waiting to walk to the car. That's early 2000, I'm sorry. In early 2019, we decided we wanted to give him a sweet 16 birthday party, given how he began his life. So we're thinking maybe we should do it at the Middleton Vet waiting room because they've taken care of him. So I go and I talk to Carrie, who's the owner, chief vet, and I say we want to, on Saturday at 1:30, because they close at 1 o'clock, we want to have a birthday party for him. We want the staff to be there. We want to bring in pizza and beverages and snacks. And she says no. And I'm shocked because we have taken all our animals there for years. Then she says, we will bring in the pizza, the beverages, and the snacks. That's how they are there. So, the party is going to be on March 16th, Saturday. St. Patrick's Day is Sunday, and they're not open on Sunday. 1:30, Gloria, Luke, and I walk into the waiting room. It is decorated. There's streamers. There are flowers. A happy birthday sign. They have a hat for him. One of the attendants has made special snacks. They have gifts for him. The staff is there. Some of them have brought their kids with them. Some of our friends are there. There's a reporter from the Lakeville Journal. There is, the following Thursday, it's a weekly newspaper, there's a half-page article about the party and a picture of Luke with his hat on. So that's at the beginning of 2019. Toward the end of 2019, before the pandemic, Luke has become quite lethargic. He seldom gets up. He's become incontinent. I have to put diapers on him. He's not eating much, which is not a good sign. We bring him to the vet. Carrie examines him, says his heart is beating 100 times a minute. He's failing. Gloria and I have been expecting this, even though we didn't say anything to each other. We look at each other. We nod. I say, let's do it. We don't want him in pain. She gives him the first shot with a sedative to relax him. Gloria kisses him. I kiss him. I say, thank you. Goodbye. Under a tree in our backyard, we have 2 dogs and 10 cats buried there. We have Luke's ashes. They're going to go with me. Those 2 dogs and 10 cats were our pets, and we loved them. But Luke was family. Thank you.
Macey Levin. Let's give another round of applause for all of our storytellers. Emily, Marisa, Ann, and Macey, thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for being here today. These events are so special to us, and we love that you came out. Just a couple things before you go. This is the first time I've ever had to do this. if you are the owner of a silver Nissan Rogue or a silver Subaru Outback, just know that your car is in an inconvenient spot, and without outing yourself, you may want to get to the parking lot sooner than later so you don't piss off everyone in the room. There's that. There's that. The other thing is, don't forget our open house the Saturday after Thanksgiving from 2 to 5 p.m. Please try and make it. It's a really special event. We haven't been able to do it for a while, so we hope to see you there. And thanks again for coming. Have a great day.